Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me is co-host Johan Oberg. Johan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be on another week. We're looking forward to talking to you and our guests again. How's your week been?
My week has been good. There's this sick thing around Europe right now. There's COVID and flu and everything going around. I've been around a lot of sick people lately. It was interesting. I took my son to the doctor this morning, and the doctor said, well, it's not COVID, but as soon as everyone stopped wearing masks, all of a sudden the flu went rampant around Switzerland. And so it's just the regular flu. He said normally it comes in the winter, but when masks came off, all of a sudden the flu came back. So it's been interesting. And on the professional side, it's just been busy. There's a lot going on with the energy prices are still kind of a little bit unpredictable, and the markets are doing things. And from a day job point of view, people want to automate and they want to make sure they have the tools to have the liquidity in place. So it's actually been really good for my day job as well, unfortunately, but good for the company.
Well, that's good. I think it's quite interesting because we look at the situation and suddenly, well, for us in the industry, energy has always been pivotal, but now it's everywhere. You read about it everywhere. So I actually took some time from our last recordings and went through some of our old shows. And it's quite interesting to see, well, forget about the first show where I was on that. We can forget about that one. But it's really, really interesting.
I already did.
But it's really interesting to actually review back and see, the guests we've had on, what we're talking about, and starting to connect the pieces between the specific topics and start realizing this. And as someone that's been in the industry for a shorter period of time than most of our guests, it was actually quite uplifting just to have a quick review on some of the guests. It was really interesting. We've done a pretty good job. There's quite a lot of content there.
Yeah, the content is growing massively. The quality of the guests is outstanding. We're very fortunate to get folks there. And what's kind of cool is like tonight, right? We're going to go through, we're going to talk another marine energy solution. I think we're talking wave energy today. And we're starting to get multiple perspectives and techniques and different ideas of how to solve some of these problems. So my takeaway in the last couple of years on the podcast is, there's no one silver bullet. There's going to be many solutions. Nobody's going to come win everything. There's no one vertical coming in. And so it excites me to hear all these different companies and different ideas and different innovation, because I think it's going to be a combination is what the end result is. And we're seeing that in the wild, right? We're seeing that with the real projects.
I totally agree. And I think this is one of the takeaways as well that we learned, that there's so many stakeholders in this ecosystem. But today I think it's quite interesting as well, because we break it down into something that is, I wouldn't say close to my heart, because it's still a very new technology, but it's very related to something I actually posted on LinkedIn recently in terms of water in general. We're very lucky to be in Switzerland. We have fresh water. We have these fountains everywhere where we can drink from. 60% of the energies produced in Switzerland is through hydropower. So, this is something that is really, really close to us. However, we're not really spoiled with the oceans, and probably not with waves either. So this is a new angle on kind of the water related to energy. So really, really interested to hear more about this. We've had a few guests on previous show. I did a quick review on them, but I think we gained a little bit more knowledge. Things are happening in this industry. So really looking forward to bringing on our guests. So I think it's time to do so. So I'll actually do it in Swedish as well. I'll try my Swedish pronunciation. So welcome to the show, Jan Skjoldhammer.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. It's an honor. And I've been listening to some of your podcasts, and I guess from us, three of us, you are the guys that know much more about energy sector than I do. but I might know a few things about wave power in particular, which might be relevant to your listeners.
Oh, for sure. I think that is definitely, as Chris usually says, we have a great advantage versus our listeners because we know you, we've spoken to you, and we've done some research, but our guest might not. So maybe to kick off the podcast, a quick introduction. Who is Jan, and what do you guys do?
Well, I'm a Norwegian, but I've been living in Sweden for the last 20 years. And my background is as an officer and having economic education, then an airline captain and pilot for 25 years, and also did a large property business while I was flying. That gave me some liberty for some time. And then came the choice: should I be flying for the next 15 years or do something more sensible? And in my drawer, I had different patent ideas laying since I was a youngster. And I had this idea about wave power. So I was weighing forth and back for 1 year. So I'll go for this and go away from a secure and nice, well paid job to something insecure. But it landed in that, I wanted to make a difference in life. So I resigned in SIS, and everybody was asking, "Are you crazy?" But I'll do this for the climate and for the long term run. Since then, I've been working basically for 6 years full time, almost without pay, burning lots of my cash, but it's meaningful, and I'm happy what I'm doing, and it goes forward very nicely. So it all looks very, very good, and I hope to be with our system in the oceans in a few years. In first with one medium size concept, 500 kilowatt, and later on our target is to be out there in the thousands around the whole globe, on the west coast primarily. Yeah.
So, in terms of wave energy, we've had some guests on before. As I mentioned in my introduction, obviously, we both, me and Chris, live in Switzerland, where hydropower is a big part. When we had talked to some of the guys, and when we also did some research, where do you see wave energy in terms of what you do now in this kind of maturity phase? We hear a lot about the investments, we hear a lot about what is coming and the next one and the next one, but where are we right now?
It's a really good question. Of course, wind power is the most mature one. It's been around for 40 years, basically. They started with a cost of about 500 euros per megawatt hour in the beginning. Then due to subsidies and learning curve, now they're down to much, much lower. And then came sun power, also with a high cost in the beginning, and learning curve going down. And tidal power is slightly ahead of wave power. They've been slightly more mature. Wave power is coming out with many different concepts out there. No one really commercial yet. They have too high costs, and there's probably 50 different solutions out there in development or in scientific research, but less so at let's say a more mature stage. So it's coming. The potential is huge. One say it's the largest untapped energy source on the world, on the planet. And all basically the west coast on the European continent, African, US or American continent, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia have vast resources of wave energy. And the numbers differ, but it can power easily 10% of the electricity needs, but most likely much, much more.
So, so you're bullish on wave energy. You see that there's a lot of opportunity there. You've made a huge personal investment, both financial and your time, to go start and be an entrepreneur in it. Um, so wave energy isn't exactly new, right? There's been folks that have talked about wave energy for some time. There's certainly skeptics, and then there's even folks that are doing some wave energy today. What makes wave energy now, and what makes it different from what you founded and are bringing to the market?
Well, there's so many solutions out there, and uh, time will show which ones will be the ones, let's say, that will be the make the breakthroughs. I think it will be several. But it won't be 50. It will be like, conversion down to perhaps 5 different concepts. And what we found is that using a different principle, by going with a rectangular float. And what you would like to hear now is also we have a hydropower plant on top of the system, like in Switzerland, up in your mountains. We just took that system up from the mountains, consisting of a Pelton turbine, put it on a large float, and coupled to a hydraulic cylinder, and coupled to the seafloor, and there we are. It's very simple, just 3 larger parts. So we're different, only one having that system, patented, 3 patents in 20 countries. And so we are one of many, but the numbers show that we have something which is quite special. And it's also verified by third-party companies or experts in Portugal, and then later on validated in our test rig and in wave tank. And then we went offshore again last week. So it's floating outside Stockholm, where Johan has probably been, outside Åkersberga actually. And theirs will be for 10 weeks for more testing.
And has the path to the journey been a smooth journey, or is it tough to get buy-in and get funding from the agencies and the research? What's the journey been like for you developing this?
It's in the beginning you're like the lone ranger. You're by yourself, putting in some money, and you're making some applications to the energy agency, for instance, and then you get some yes and some no's. So we write applications here there for grants, and you get 3 no's, 1 yes, 3 no's, 1 yes, and that you keep on going like that. And then you can choose to take in investors on the side or go by private money. I chose the latter one, and that is my choice because I believe in what I do. And but it's nice now since we have these grants coming in, and then of course being still the 100% owner is kind of a luxury in that way. But it's you heard about, of course, the valley of death, which is common for companies like ours. You have some tailwind in the beginning, and then you might have some problems either technically or financially. But so far we've been lucky. The system has worked basically from day one. The first tank testing more than 1 year ago in the UK, it just functions basically good. Of course, some minor things, but the principle is still there. So we're kind of happy. So we're just working on that, and larger grants, and we get calls from larger companies, utility companies calling to us, not the other way around, which is nice. And yesterday I called from European Investment Bank offering their services and to us in the future, which is nice. So far we're quite happy actually.
So how do you see that?
And so
Yeah, I think that's an interesting part in terms of the investments. We had a few investors on here as well for the energy market. I think generally across all of our guests and all of our discussion is that there's a major shift towards investing in sustainability. I know that the BlackRock was quite early out in the large investment company around this. When you are approached by investors or looking for money, what are the main arguments? Because we also see in the return on the investment is a short term. You could invest in wind or solar rather than something that is more untested. How does this investment work versus others, or is it that they have dedicated a certain portion of money towards wave energy or others outside of solar and wind?
To say one word first is the potential. The potential is huge, and it's a new market, the giant market. That's very, very important in this thing. And now also just to go to the latest months of problems now in Europe. Of course, the problem with energy scarcity has been even more accentuated with the problems in Ukraine, and the problems then with, of course, fossils or fuels coming through. And here in Sweden, for instance, you see this wild fluctuations in energy prices. So when the wind goes down, energy prices goes up, double, triples. and the opposite this happens. It's a perfect cycle then, and an anti-cycle between prices and wind power. And why is that? Of course, wind power, for about 10 days per month, it provides perhaps 15% of the max capacity. And in those hours, those days, you need to have some other power coming in. And of course, you have some power coming in some days as well. But in total, it's at least 10 days a month where you have very little wind power. And it's also perhaps 10 days a month or more where you have little sunshine. So there you are. You have to get, at present, you are going for fossils. But the nice things about wave power is that when the wind goes down, waves are still there. Because first comes the sun, then comes the heat, then comes the wind, then comes the waves. And waves, they build across the Atlantic for days and distance. And they remain. And you can forecast them 3 to 4 days ahead. And then the combination of having then the synergy of wave power and wind power together will do what fossils do today. It's very important. So the base load of wind power is often down to 15%. That means the minimum you can deliver by wind power. So if you have 100% capacity in Germany, for instance, at one day, you might have 15% next day. But wave power by itself has a base load which is 2.5 times higher. So if you had just wave power, no wind power at the same scale, you would need to buy much less fossils. But if you combine wave power and wind power, the off-phased, your base load will be 4 times higher, 3 to 4 times higher than by just wind power. So we need to buy much less fossils. And this comes also so-called energy independence. You will be independent of the fossil suppliers of fuel. And you will have energy security because the waves are there all year round. So this combination has kind of changed the outlook for our industry, because all of a sudden we are much more important than just, to say it harshly, 1 month ago.
All right.
It was important before, but now even more accentuated.
What I hear you saying is, the variability of wind or even solar wave is much more predictable, and therefore more akin to what we consider a base load technology, because that what are optimal conditions. So you, in the beginning of the interview, you talked about all kinds of opportunity. You named all kind of coastline. Describe the perfect wave conditions for generating. What's ideal, what's too big, and what's too small?
Wave power can operate from Trondheim in Norway down to South Africa, the whole coastline on the west side, basically. Also some on the east side, but basically on the west side. On the northern hemisphere, you have stronger winds and you have stronger waves. And in the center around the equator, it's you have longer waves, you have more stable waves, but they're longer and they're more shallow. And then on the southern hemisphere, they are like on the northern hemisphere. So the waves are quite strong in Peru and in Ireland. In Portugal, they're like medium sized, and outside, let's say, west coast of North Africa, they're more, shallower, but very stable. So for those units where you can, adjust the system, you can extract the same amount of power outside Africa as you can outside Ireland. But for the ones having a constant size of the float, for instance, it's more difficult. Then you have much less power outside West Africa or outside, where could it be, Mexico, for instance, than you can in Canada. I mentioned that in that relation, we have a system which consists of a large float. It's rectangular, and also power take-up in the middle. The float is very cheap. It's like building a ship. We can adjust that float from being 38 meters to being 60 meters, depending on where you are, and perhaps down to 25 meters outside Ireland. Using the same machinery, you just adjust the size of the float to fit those waves in those areas. And in that way, I can say basically the whole world is relevant for wave power. It's a fantastic, huge market, and most people nowadays have just heard about that thing. But for the investors listening, and even more perhaps for potential partners like utility companies, oil companies that want to transition to something greener, and a new giant market, plus then shipyards that want to produce something else than oil rigs. This is coming. It's going to happen.
What depth do you anchor these at? Where are you designing these to be at?
This is different from different wave power technologies. Ours, a bit depending on the wave heights, but from about 40 to 80 meters depth is what we aim for in the beginning. We can go up to 200 meters later on for a slightly higher cost, but right now we're going to that interval.
And then are you envisioning these being like farms where there's clusters of these wave devices in an area, so that's how you get to the power levels that you want to output then by having a number of these?
Oh yes, definitely. It's the same as wind power. Actually, you just use water instead of wind, but the water is so much more dense. Water has a weight which is 830 times higher than wind or air. I mean, and even if wind is blowing quicker, you can have about 3 times more energy per sea area as opposed to offshore wind. So you can have the same. You can have this in 20, 50, 100 units out there, which you will lose less sea area than wind power. And of course, you can also combine them in the same location or on the same cable where that's relevant.
So cost wise, compared to let's say putting floating wind in or something like that, how does this align cost wise?
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, wind power had the cost of about 500 euros per megawatt hour in the beginning.
Hmm.
Wave power generally now by Ocean Energy Europe and other ones estimated having starting cost from about 300 to 600,
Hmm.
slightly lower than wind power. But the technologies are different, and of course, it's hard to be exact before you have it proven in the waters. Uh, our calculations based on third party and our testing shows that we should be below 200 euros per megawatt hour, just basically from the start, from the first 6 units, actually below 160. And then you have the learning curve adding on that. So after that, for the next 10 units, we should be below 125. And of course, the diesel costs at those islands having diesel instead run at about 200. So even without subsidies, it's a profitable business basically from start, given that our numbers are correct, of course.
So an interesting kind of concept around it, and also the combination as you described with wind and potentially solar also as the base. Technologies, there's a few to choose between, as if I heard it correctly, and obviously strong believer in your technology, which we're glad to have on. but one of the things what
Yeah,
we also discussed on this show, it's not always technology that wins. It's not always the size that wins. It's also the adoption around this. So what I'm curious to elaborate a little bit more on, you mentioned that you could actually use it across the entire coast from Norway down to southern parts of Africa. Do you see any differences in terms of the approach and the take up in these regions across the world, so that you can use wave power in basically along all the coast is one thing, but from a regulatory governmental investment, do you see any areas that are leading the way that really pushes this more than others?
yeah, very good question. So far, best short answer: Europe is leading, especially I think UK with Ireland and Scotland, Wales also quite actively, but also then France, Spain, Portugal has been very active on this side. And Holland, Belgium is also there. They have smaller waves, and Denmark has been active. So basically, Europe has been very interested in this for a long time. US is coming along now with Oregon, with the test center up there, and the Department of Transportation, I think it's called, is also adding funding. So they're coming along, and they see the potential and the need, of course, because like California has sun power at daytime exceeding perhaps the needs. At nighttime they have nothing, and then it's fossils plus of course some nuclear. But it's coming along nicely. Like Australia, for instance, having this vast potential, there is very little understanding for this, even if they have one of the best coastlines ever. So it differs quite a
So
bit.
why is this? Because I think the countries you mentioned, California is part of the US, of course, you mentioned Europe and Australia, they're all kind of advocates of renewable energy. They have resources, probably also access to investments, but why are some of them picking it up more? Because they're all investing in renewable in one way or the other, I would assume.
Yeah. Yeah. I would assume it's lack of knowledge basically. So what you guys are doing is actually breaking that thing. You are making rings on the water, so that more people know about this and understand the potential. And also, of course, there has been quite a few failures into wave power, costly ones, and for instance, investors, they say, we have lost, so many millions on this, for instance, so and so, and they talk to their friends and say, I will just sit on the fence and wait, and that's human nature. You want to be safe, but if you want to be safe, you're coming too late to the train. I had a talk yesterday with the Port of San Diego, for instance, very interested in what we're doing, and they want to perhaps deploy outside there. We might have a meeting with the US Navy about that, for instance. Uh, and I told them that it's important to be on the ball, because if our concepts will be one of the good ones, then after it's in the water, it runs nicely, it's cost effective, then you might have 50 offers from their own around the world, and then we probably go for the larger ones, and then Port of San Diego perhaps won't have anything. But if they're coming along now, as you said, build it by the use, take a shipyard, for instance, in that area, build one on license contract for us and see how it works. Then you're in for the next round. So sitting on the fence might be comfortable, but I think it's very important that you take some risks, and there's a potential huge gain for the climate and also for the economic upside, both for utilities, oil companies, shipyards, industries. It's people don't know enough about this, but they will know. I assure you.
All right, so the market's coming along. You're looking for some early movers. You're speculating that once you've vetted this, that the larger players will line up to, because of the economics and because of the results. How big is your company today? Where are you guys at? So you did talk about that you've got something in the ocean right now. We were pretty excited. You showed us photos earlier in the day of recent deployment. So that's pretty cool, because I think the first time we met, you were still showing me photos in a test tank. And so I was happy to see ocean behind your waves. That was a very impressive leap forward. So where are you guys at as a company?
Well, it actually was in the water also 2 years ago, but in smaller floats. So now it's out again, and but we are at so-called TRL level number 5 to 6. That's technical readiness level, which is a 9 scale from start to commercial level, and that means that we have tested it in the wave tank, in Coast Laboratory in Plymouth, and also in LHEA in Nantes this summer, and also 2 times offshore, with a 1 to 5 scale, as we call it. And then we're now moving over to the design of the full scale, which you see behind me. It's 38 meters long, times 8 meters, times 4.5 meters. It's a large float. The float is cheap to build. It's not. It's cost like 400K or something like that. And then we will add on the other parts. So right now we're into the design phase for the next year, about looking into all the forces and working with some consultants down the line a bit as well, and then also with subcontractors. And then we'll probably freeze the design within 18 months from now, and then start working on the construction, and then test some on the quay side outside a large shipyard, most likely, and then dump it in the water in about 3 years from now. And If I may go slightly back to Johan's questions about the potential around the oceans, we are looking, if possible, for a large partner like utility companies, like oil companies, and large shipyards like Damen, for instance. The reason is that for the better of the environment, these companies have offices all around the world. If we work together, we can develop quicker, and we can use their locations and connections all around to the world to deploy much quicker. It might be even less of economic gain for me, but it might not be as well. But it will go quicker. And as the environment needs this, as I just mentioned, to lower the use of fossils, perhaps by a large percentage, then I think these large corporations should come along. And by doing that, if I may add as well, they will, first of all, they will have a 10% or 10 times X factor on investment in few years, like any investors. In addition, they'll be able to have a transition from what they're now doing to a more climate friendly system. And it can also heighten the base load. So if you are, for instance, Enel or EDP or NG, a utility company in Europe, there are problem nowadays because of when the base load is down to 10-15%, you have to buy gas quickly to counter for the drop in that, and your grid is going up and down. But if you have adding in the wave power, you can also add more wind power without distorting the balance. But if you add more just wind power, the problem gets even worse. So the utilities companies have this advantage of going with us early. And also the oil companies, they want to be greener. You can think about looking behind me, having this floater set on the side, Shell Renewables, 35 times 3-meter billboard on the side. And on board you have politicians, media, royals perhaps coming on board, even school classes. That kind of greenifying you cannot buy. It's impossible to buy that effect. So by going with us, for instance, you're showing that you're doing something for the climate, you're doing your best, instead of just sitting on the fence and waiting. So I think we can offer both good solution and a good marketing, and then also for themselves, they can do a larger impact given that we succeed at what we do. It was a long answer, but I hope it's relevant.
So it may have been a bit more commercial than we normally do on the podcast. So I get the enthusiasm and the passion for the project. I'd prefer to speak a little bit more generally, right at the moment, sure. A bit about waves, because I question when you casually say it's 3 years out. So if I'm looking at 2030, 2050 and where folks are going, is it coming fast enough? Is the technology? So I get the base load. I get the fact that turbines take a while to spin up. Gas is a very efficient way to get the base load back up when the sun goes away or when the wind stops blowing. Mm-hmm. Is 3 years quick enough for the goals that folks have set out and for some of the climate change goals?
I'm afraid not. I think we are in the water with the first one in 3 years, and then you go for a pre-commercial area of perhaps 5 units for some years for some more testing and to have the certifications by DNB, for instance, or Lloyd's, and then comes the larger rollout. So it doesn't go quick enough. But of course, our idea is to use licensing as one of the way to get this out in the world. So if we, instead of by ourselves, maybe we can produce perhaps 50 a year in some years. But if you have 20 companies around the world, for instance, shipyards, doing the same, and then they use the local competence or employees to learn more about how to do this, and they use the local market, things can happen much quicker. So we are kind of then offering as one of the revenue models without the partnerships, which I might talk too much about, then offering licensing to shipyards and industries around the world, because in that way they can assist the local coastline of their region with more power and have more competence, and also have this rollout going on quicker. I think that's a good model to help the environment forward.
All right, so I get a licensing model and things like that. The other thing you said earlier in the interview, you mentioned that you were very proud that you had a number of patents in a number of countries, and now we're talking licensing. If I look at holistically marine and wave energy, how much open source and how much sharing goes on in this technology, and how much of just pure science is there that you're able to leverage, and how much is this just kind of building a better mousetrap that's proprietary?
It's a good question. What happens, I think, generally is that in the beginning of any concept like this, you keep the lid on until you have the patents out and secured, and then you're more open because then it's more tricky for anyone to come in. And also remember, these are big pieces, so if someone should try to copy it, it's a bit tricky to be invisible out there. So having patents is very good. But of course, we're keeping a lid on software, for instance, and the control systems and the more finer detail.
I guess you're going opposite of my question, though. I guess my question is how much collaboration is there to get wave? Because I think it's an uphill battle for any one company, right? I mean, I don't think that one company dominates the world, and whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's wave or marine, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how much collaboration is there in marine energy? I mean, Johan, you're looking at me. Does that question make sense, or am I like asking a strange
No,
question?
no, no. I think it's I think it's pretty clear, and it's an interesting question as well because we've had this before. Are you running your own silos? Are you actually going to be an adequate asset to the energy transformation if it's siloed, or is it actually going to be how much collaboration? I think that this is across all industries.
Yeah. Well, there's two answers to this. There's for instance, Europe, we have Ocean Energy Europe, which is a collaboration organization that we are all a member of. And that one, we share experiences, we talk together, and they work towards the European Union or Commission to front wave power and tidal power, which is very important, and we are very glad they're doing this for us. When it comes to the technical side, of course, the universities do lots of research. We have ourselves had the pleasure of working with 50 students over the years, and they do extra jobs, etc., which is basically open source. So a lot of it is out there, but of course not all. But I think most is that this basic system you can see on 50 companies how it works. Basically, it's just that the finer details, as I was into, is more or less kept half secret at least.
So there's no Elon Musk plans here then to drive the energy or the water energy versus the EV, where you just open up all the patents, give all access to everything, and say, listen, this is the way we're going to speed up the the progression of water energy or ocean energy.
It's an interesting thought. I'm into this, as I said, because I wanted to do something meaningful in life, not just fly an aircraft, which was, of course, fun in many ways. So I wouldn't be too scared about doing something like that. But since we are dependent on investors and we are dependent on partners coming in, then your value lays in the patents. So if I open up that, I think it will be more tricky to go forward with full speed. So I have to until further hold on to the patents. Later on, perhaps when we're running fine, it could be an option to just say, go for it. This is a climate crisis, build it. We can talk more about that later on. It's an interesting thought, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm from the U.S. I'm a capitalist through and through. So what I do tell young folks that are asking about going into the energy business is that it's a great place to be, and disruption doesn't mean not making profit. I'm not at all going there. I'm not saying that people shouldn't find opportunity. I just kind of like to hear, because I think when you're competing for resources or when you're building market, I like to see where there's collaboration in the segments in the vertical, right? So in marine, I like to see that we're jointly trying to get a marine solution. If and what you say is true, which is saying, hey, it can produce a good base load and it's part of the solution, then we'll probably need multiple vendors to offer multiple solutions, because not one size is going to fit all for everybody, right? Somebody might want to buy the high end, and somebody might want to buy an entry level, and you may not specialize at the entry level. You may specialize in a very specific niche. That's why I asked the question. So more about the company. So you talked about having interns through. How big is your company today? So it sounded from what you just described that you have basically the engineering and intellectual property. is the core company. It sounded like you were working potentially with third parties to actually do the construction and execution of building these. Does that mean you're a team of 10, 20, 50? How many people work at your operation today?
Yeah, we're 5 persons at full time, and one doctor. Most other ones master of science. I'm the one without the relevant education, but I'm the inventive mind, and know a few things about business, perhaps. And I also like technical things. And then we have about 5 more persons coming in part-time. They've been with us for a long time in marketing, and in a lawyer, and of course the board as well. So let's say 10 plus persons in total, but 5 on full-time. But we have to expand, I think, to be able to survive the working hours, basically. Yeah.
So
And so, go ahead, Jan.
I'm just looking at a little bit of time. I think we're coming up to our mark, but I have plenty of questions. I'm going to squeeze in one last one for me at least. We'll see if we got some time for another one. But we discussed a lot with this transition and the impacts of, everything is not crystal clear. We all believe in this drive towards renewable energy, but it's not a straight road. And for example, we talked about wind power, and everyone wants wind power, but not on my backyard, kind of a thing. When it comes to your technologies, and this is also an infrastructure. I see that the picture behind it. That means that it's going to be outside on the ocean fronts. What are kind of the conceptions here, and what are the feedback from tourism, from people? How far is this? Is it the same impact as wind? Are you going to come across that resistance, or is this different?
That's a very relevant question. I'm from Norway, and I hear my friends in Norway, they are having a hard time with wind power when it's next to their cabin or house, something like that. And of course, we need wind power. It's a good source of wind energy. But wave power is different because it's out to sea from 500 meters from the coastline. If you have a very steep coastline, perhaps up to 5 kilometers in some areas, but it's hardly visible, and it doesn't make any sound that can disturb anyone, and it doesn't hurt any animal life. So, and it's stable, as mentioned before. So in my mind, I can say, what more can I ask for? If then the cost comes down to be comparable with wind power, or even lower, if it is stable, out of sight, doesn't make any sound, doesn't hurt animal life, it should be exactly what the world is
Hmm.
looking for. And also, if I might add that, for instance, in Sweden, you have the wind power up in north. Then we have transmission lines going down to the south, and of course, you're losing energy on that distance. Most people live along the coastlines, so we can have the power coming directly into the cities on the coastline. It's much better than having long transmission lines going through Europe, for instance, or through your country. For instance, it might be windy in Sweden and it might be calm in Portugal, but and the opposite. But transporting all that energy over that distance would mean a loss of perhaps 30-40%. Plus, it will take lots of land mass into question, which is difficult again. So in that way, also I think wave power and tidal power has an advantage. It's just close to the coastline and close to the cities.
Well, Johan, do you want to squeeze
No,
any more in, or
I
you
think
got
that was
any
a good answer
thoughts?
to.
I mean, to me, I think that I'm still bullish. Having gone through this interview, I like hearing about the wave energy. I wish it was sooner. What I find as being in the industry and talking to professionals, many don't believe things that aren't here yet. So folks that have been around the power industry for some period of time, they want to see the actual product to actually start believing that it's coming, or that they can start forecasting for it. But it does seem like it could be a potential element. If you were talking to someone young going into the industry today, what would you recommend if they had interest in marine and wave? How would you direct them, man?
Well, I talked to a lot of my students about that, and I say that working for us for a while, it's good to learn about renewable energy because this is the future, and there has been the last 20, 30 years it's been the IT sector that has been the growing one for the investors. But I recently heard one of these large investors saying that that time is slightly behind us. Now it is the deep tech, mechanical things or deep tech in the renewables, which is a new blooming sector. So there could be a transition also for the investors to see that, well, we have Spotify's and the other ones, and there might be a few more ones. But it could be that this is all changing to more and more on the deep tech side. So I would say for people coming into this business, read on, learn, work for, if you like, wind power, a mature industry, but perhaps look for our sector. It's a new one. It's more exciting. All my team is very, they want to go, and they're very happy to work with this because it's new, it's renewable, it's green. It's what more can I ask for as a young person or anyone wanted to be into something which is meaningful is right here.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest on the show. I am looking forward to watching this journey as Insider's Guide to Energy and seeing as it progresses. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
And for our audience, you've spent another hour listening to Insider's Guide to Energy. We hope you've enjoyed this content as much as we have. If you have, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like or make comments about the content. You will get responses, and we look forward to speaking to you again next week. Bye-bye.